officially time to come out of hibernation because we're live for the B2B Community Builder Show, Season 5, episode I lost track, but this is going to be awesome. I'm your host and Chief Executive Connector, Pablo Gonzalez. With us today is a guy that we just started getting to know a little bit right now, but absolute personal role model for me. He's the founder of the advisory firm Eddie Would Grow. He's the author of The Smartest Business Writing on the Internet via the Harvard Business Review and my weekly obsession, Category Pirates, with which I don't shut up about or stop sharing with people, and or coming soon, try to imitate. Author of groundbreaking book and concept, Superconsumers, got it right here, and highly, highly recommend. Really cool stuff. A Tesla super consumer himself, the second most famous Eddie to come out of the Hawaiian Islands, Eddie Yoon. Welcome to the show, Eddie.
Thanks, Pablo. That's awesome. I'm super psyched to be here, and I can't wait to get into it. So
I can't wait to get into it either. But right now, I want to welcome the community that has shown up. Thank you for coming. This is what I like to call the roll call. We got Tony Winslow in the house. Tony is a guy that I'm helping advise on some of my marketing stuff. Really smart marketing mind. Gareth Beverly, my friend from high school, and a Brit himself. Kevin Bree, the head of marketing for Red Tea Homes in Denver, which I really, really admire that company. They're doing sustainable development, right? They're making sustainable development accessible to all out in Denver. Jesse Rittenhouse, a green building expert. As you can tell, I had a stint in the green building world in my previous career as well. Jesse Rittenhouse, another green building. Kaleem Al, the marketing philosopher of LinkedIn. Silji, you're going to have to let me know if I'm saying your name correctly. Silji Foyen, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. He's saying from Norway, man, this is amazing. Hello, Pablo and Eddie. I know he's joining just based on your name recognition alone, Eddie, so I blame you for that one. Lee Bishop, who's a super consumer for the Not Your Average Investor Show and community. We're going to talk about him soon. Lee, good to have you. Jess Merrill, my new one of my new best friends down in South Florida, who is revolutionizing fundraising for nonprofits, and Lori Goldman, also from Denver, Colorado, who is a fixture here in the community. Great to have everybody. This is a community-driven show. I want to insert your thoughts into this conversation. The best way to do it is to put it into, Isar Matis, who's from COVID, Florida. My partner, Isar, he got COVID over the weekend, but he's still here because he's pumped up. So Celia from Norway, good to have you, Celia. This is awesome. Eddie, let's kick it off how we normally kick off this show, man. What is we're here to talk about super consumers. In your, I'm sure, breadth of expertise, every time somebody asks you, why should I care? why should people care about super consumers? How do you explain that?
Yeah, I think if you care about business growth, then, of the couple of decades that I've been a growth strategy guy, one of the clear things that I know is if you create a category, you're going to grow a lot faster and more profitably than if you compete in one. That's kind of point one. Point two, creating a category is hard, and it's not always clear, and everything they taught you in school doesn't apply, because everything they taught you in school was who's the best and benchmark against them and what's the best practice, and can't do that when you're creating something entirely new. And so if you're trying to really go down this, you're like, I want to grow faster and more profitably and be rewarded for that exponentially, and I can't rely on the past, what do I do? You got to rely and find a North Star. That's the super consumer out there, which is the most profitable and the most passionate consumer. They're the smartest people in the category, often know more about the category writ large than some of the executives, and often the case more than the investors do. In particular, they, it's not just because they buy a lot of it, they're just super smart about how they use the category. They use it in way different ways than we can ever imagine. And, some of my favorites are, there are Pedialyte super consumers that are not children. They are, shall we say, folks maybe in college or thereafter who've had one too many. And turns out Pedialyte is great as a hangover cure, but they don't market it that way, right? So how do they figure that out? That's what the consumer that buys a lot and cares a lot does with it. So that's kind of my thought is, if you want to compete, it's not for you. If you think you can rely on the past, it doesn't really matter. But if you want to create and grow, and you know that the past is going to lead you astray, then you got to find that North Star, and that's the super consumer.
Man, I love the idea of calling the consumer the North Star, right? Like that to me seems so intuitive as far as how, how to serve people well, right? It's not about you, it's about the person that you're serving. And a couple of the statistics, right, that, because I read this book, right? Like I read the book early on in my fascination with category design. Like I read Play Bigger, then all of a sudden you and Lockhead are starting to write stuff. So of course I'm going to read your book. And as we are executing on the things that we execute, some of this stuff started coming to light. And two of the things that became very real for us is a couple of things that you talk about with super consumers, which is this idea that less than 10% of consumers will often lead to 50 to 70% of the revenue in a category. And this idea that a super consumer of 1 is a super consumer of 9 are things that we're living, right? So like, I would love for you to kind of explain the first one in your own words. This idea, how is it that 10% of consumers can lead to so much more revenue?
Yeah, no, it's the I would say if even if you don't like math, I mean, I think people kind of get like not everybody is the same. Number one, right? And my favorite is if you have kids, then 50% of parents are below average. I think people generally understand that, right? And so if you kind of work off the assumption that not everybody is the same, some people spend a lot more and are smarter about the category than others, and that mathematically, if you look at the data, my old consulting firm was acquired by Nielsen, so I had access to quite a bit of data. Like anything sold in the grocery store, that's where that 10% that drives 30 to 50 to 70% of the category revenue comes from. But what's interesting is it's even more extreme in digital categories, right? The stuff you buy in the grocery store is all analog stuff. I recall casual gaming, 0.15% of the users drive 50% of the revenue, right? Because most of it's freemium. And so I remember years ago, I was looking at my credit card statement, and then we saw this like $99 on iTunes. Like, what was this about? And then I was like, oh no, my kids have figured out our Apple password and iCloud and whatnot. And turns out it was my wife buying extra lives on Candy Crush, and she didn't know that it was $1 every time she got a life there. She was like, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, it seems like you are, like, right? But like this notion of a very small percentage of people drive the lion's share of category economics, probably no better explained than what's going on with Tesla now, right? So forget milk and cookies and forget video games and other digital products. Like Tesla, worth over $1 trillion, the most valuable car company. My hypothesis will be the most valuable company in the world in a few years, all built and predicated on super consumers, right? It was, you look at Elon Musk's master plan, it was, hey, we're going to build an electric sports car. We're going to use that money to build a more affordable electric luxury car. We're going to use that money to build an electric sedan, and do all of that while providing sustainable energy generation and storage. And so, like you look at, I think what he's fond of saying, Tesla and Ford are the only two automotive companies that have not declared bankruptcy. And Tesla is the only company in 100 years to get the scale production with automotive. And so, and he himself said he thought Tesla had a 10% chance of surviving. So how did he make that work? Through super consumers, right? There are no crazier super consumers than the Tesla folks out there in that community. And as evidenced by, if you saw in the news, the Tesla Austin plant opening, he called it the cyber rodeo, right? People were like, he didn't announce anything new. He just said he was going to do the Cybertruck later on, this and that. But it was like, no, you don't understand. It was a party for the super consumer. That's all it really was, right? Yeah. Drone light show, everything else, just to celebrate. Thank you very much. That without you, we wouldn't have created $1 trillion value company.
Yeah, totally, man. Totally. That's, so first of all, this idea that super consumers beget other super consumers, if it weren't for your writing in, you write about Tesla as much as anybody, or at least you share your insights on Tesla on LinkedIn all the time. that really clicked for me, and that got me buying Tesla stock. My partner Isar, who I just mentioned a little while ago, he's a Tesla super consumer to the max, right? Like he's a guy that won't shut up about Tesla, he's in all the groups, right? Like it's so obvious. He just wrote in here he wished he could have gone, but he was actually at the space launch this last weekend, which is really cool. So as you describe it, this whole like Tesla business model to me is really wonderful in the sense that the big aha was nobody that buys, and this is from reading about you and then living with, Isar as my partner, right? Like this idea that anybody that buys a Tesla is never going back to not having a Tesla.
Yeah.
Right. So like in the world of like lifetime value and how important that is, as opposed to, client acquisition, that became very, very clear to me that if you can retain so many of your clients and make sure that they are forever clients, while you can slowly add in on the front, right? Kaleem, who's in here, he talks about sustainable growth as well. That became a very, very apparent, like real world example of how this thing works. And it just struck me as very sustainable and very de-risked to a certain extent. Is that
Yes.
is that kind of right?
100%, because it's the you've seen those like funny story, not funny, haha, but like the stories of the people who blindly follow GPS and drive their car into a lake or into a wall or whatever. Like, that North Star thing is really important, right? If your North Star are the masses, basically what you're saying is, I'm going to blindly follow the lowest common denominator consumer out there. And that LCD consumer is going to tell you the same things, make it cheaper and make it faster, like spend more money to make it better and faster for less money, right? And what the super consumer will do is, hey, make it different. I want you to actually do things that maybe you hadn't thought of beforehand. And so one of the things, I mean, it's funny that, Elon is in the news about trying to, his Twitter stake and one on the board and not on the board and whatnot. But like, you can see so much of the Tesla product development and optimization occurring on Tesla. Random people are tweeting at him like, hey, can you add this? It's like, sure. And the next over-the-air software update comes out from there. And actually, you saw a little bit of that thought process on Twitter now. I mean, I think that probably was freaking out the people at Twitter when he was like, should we add an edit button? Hey, none of you want to come into the office. Let's use the headquarters for to solve the homelessness problem in San Francisco, which I just thought was very amusing. But like, just this whole notion of, Twitter's not real life, but it is a great place to find your super consumer and engage with them and have that real-time dialogue about, not only what they want, but why they want it. That's really the key important part. Because like, when you ask an average or that lowest common denominator consumer, why do they want what they want? It's like, I don't know. They don't really have a good answer for you. But the super consumer will tell you, it is because I am on a quest for XYZ. And it's because of the way my parents raised me, and because of some scars I may have had as a child or the dreams that I had. Like, you get to the root of the super consumer quest that they're really trying to solve for. And that leads to the super of one as a super of nine and different categories. Because like, if you're spending along one category for this quest manifests itself in so many other categories. And what it gets down to is like, every consumer has a set of dreams and nightmares that sometimes they're afraid to articulate it out loud. Sometimes they may not even be self-aware of why they feel those things, but like, those emotions run deep and they drive you to spend money in ways that, no promotion can do. Frankly, very few innovations can do. And if you don't understand the very core of, what makes Pablo Pablo, from your earliest memories to who you are now, then you'll never fully understand how to run your business and innovate it in a way that gets the maximum value out of it. And that's the part that I feel like is the most misunderstood part, is that in general, too many businesses take the super consumer concept and treat it transactionally, like, oh, I can use this to execute this or that or whatever. but not realizing that the lifetime value of a super consumer is infinity. And that if you actually treat them like you would a longtime friend or a family member, then you'll never have a shortage of things that you can create and innovate against and increase the value of your business for.
Yeah, totally, man. I love that. I love that. Kalima's giving you an emoji, standing ovation over here. This transitions very nicely into the super consumer of one is a super consumer of nine. I said it early in this call, right? That Lee Bishop, who's here with us, is a super consumer of the Not Your Average Investor show and the community that we built for JWB. And, you know, very early on, we saw him showing up all the time, being super pumped about promoting the show and wanting to talk to other clients and wanting to help out. So Lee's a good friend of mine now, right? Like, obviously, and be involved. Leah's putting in the chat, right? And it's like, every time we would ask him, why is this valuable to you? He's like, well, it just feels like we're hanging out with a couple of friends here. So the more, instead of leaning into real estate education and investing education and all these different things that most investing vehicles do, we leaned into this idea of how do we create an environment where everybody feels like they're just like chumming it up with each other. And that's been directly responsible for the growth of that community, which I give him a lot of credit for being our first cheerleader. And, you know, Lee is now showing up to my show, which is another proof of the super consumer of one is a super consumer of eight, right? Like, if you find that vein that you can really serve somebody with, that they like, that transcends to other things, it'll, you know, in this scope, it would be, you know, because right now this is a client of mine that I'm providing a service for, and now this is the service that I'm providing for myself. But in other lenses, it could be, how else can you increase that LTV, right? How else can you take consumers that you're already serving on one end and provide another service on the back end that they also need, and they know, like, and trust you, and already will buy in, right? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, 100%. And if I always say, like, if I could go back and rewrite the book, I would have made the super of one as the super of nine the main idea, actually, as it were, because, like, it's probably the most jarring thing to talk about, because it's the most surprising, number one, and it is the best shot at helping people understand the consumer as a whole person and not just as a transaction, right? It's like, oh, you're more than your category. You're actually multiple things on a quest that makes a lot of sense if I were you with it. And in part, this is the thing that I find so fascinating about this idea, is that it's actually not that hard to do, right? Is that if you're, I always say, like, imagine you don't need to be a data scientist that can extract the p-value from your data set and kind of like go at it at the nano measurement scope with it. What you actually need to do is, it's more of a wide angle lens, right? Is like, hey, these people who care quite deeply, you talked about, yeah, it makes sense. A real estate investor is probably interested in investing in general. And if you're interested in investing in general, you probably have some curiosity about crypto. If you're interested about that, you probably have some interest about blockchain. If you're interested about that, then, and that's where you just never know where the thread goes. And this whole, one of the core ideas that I talk about is that we talked about the North Star as a super consumer, but the reality is, if you've ever been a, stargazer, you're like, look, the super consumer actually highlights other stars, other categories that create a category constellation that you can see, like, oh, it's Orion's Belt I'm looking at, or it's Ursa Minor, Ursa Major. And, now I see not just the point at which I'm headed, but I see the big picture of how they all come together, right? And so that category constellation idea, I think, is so important, because A, you see the customer consumer as a whole person. B, I think it helps you innovate in a very different way. I call it the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup innovation, right? Which is, the #1 chocolate brand in America is the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, which is just amazing, because, like, peanut butter is a very American thing, like, right? So like,
Yeah.
it's not very commonly found, but it is that, at some point somebody was like, oh, these two things go really nicely together. And it is that combination of like, hey, this legacy category combined with that legacy category, it's like a Reese's peanut butter. I never would have thought that they made sense together, but they do. And, in the same way that, is Starbucks a coffee company, or is it really like a milkshake company in disguise? Like they sell more milk than they do by volume than coffee. That's a great example of, like, oh, who'd have thunk? Well, presumably Europeans with their lattes and whatnot. But then you're like, well, what's the American version of that? Well, let's double the sugar, double the milk with it, and then and triple the size, and there we go, right? We have this multi-billion-dollar category that's been created from there. So, like, I think this the category constellation helps you see the consumer as a whole person. Number one, it reminds you that it is so important to be curious and to not be arrogant about, I know everything about the consumer or whatnot. Like, because that's often what I find is that there's a strong correlation, because the first half of my career was serving the Fortune 100 and the very successful companies who know they're successful and generally tend to believe like there's nothing that I don't know about my consumer already. And the reality is, when you actually pull on the thread, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And was like, well, duh. You're looking through a microscope and you're like, imagine driving a car just through a microscope. You're going to get into some accidents. You're going to miss some things along the way, right? Versus the wide angle lens is going to show you some very, very different things from an innovation standpoint. Actually, my contention is that every business decision you can make better, faster, and more profitably through this lens of what are the other category constellations that I'm dealing with. Whether it's HR, like, hey, do I really have to hire somebody in my industry, or maybe I'm at Starbucks and I should hire from the dairy industry with it, right? To finance, like, hey, I need somebody who can think about, I'll stay with the Starbucks lane, is I need a beverage finance person, but maybe I need a gift card finance person because, we have billions of dollars of money on the app. And so maybe I need a financial services person, right? I mean, you can go through any business, every business function, and you can't show me one that could not be better informed and make better decision-making through this lens of a super one is a super fine. That's why I think it's so powerful.
Man, that is super powerful. The category constellation. I never thought about that. Does that look like, is there a visual representation of that, Eddie, or is that just kind of like a concept?
It's a concept. I mean, I've done it for individual clients when, they understand, like, hey, somebody who is a wine super consumer is, these are people, again, they don't just buy a lot of wine, they try different wines. And in particular, the way that they do it is, mostly pre-COVID, but now it's coming back, but you go out to eat and you drink wine by the glass, which is not an economically smart decision. But when you think about a wine super consumer, and some of the folks on the webinar may be that, but like, these are people who love wine, but they're haunted by this notion that there is a better wine that is more delicious, more accessible, more fun, even more affordable than they had, and that the wine that they're drinking now is, a swill compared to what they could be drinking tomorrow, right? And that quest haunts them and causes them to hunt for things. And so not only, but you can find them on the credit card statement, because it's like, well, you go out to eat because you're drinking wine by the glass, and that's great. Well, and if you're drinking when you go out to eat, you need a designated driver, or you do ride sharing. And I probably am going to find somebody who has a day trading account and likes to go to Vegas, because I've spoken to a couple of master sommeliers for my work in the space. And they're like, yeah, trying a new wine is no different than picking a horse at the racetrack. You could totally lose your money, and you might be also thrilled at the end of the day. You don't really know. It is that thrill of gambling that keeps you motivated. So he's like, I'm not surprised that you see a high correlation and overlap with day trading and people who try wine, and that just gives you a wholly different view of who the person is. and how to reframe the category, because there's a guy that I talked to, and he has a restaurant. I'm blanking on his name. He's a master som in Disney World, and he doesn't have a wine by the glass program or a wine flight program. He has a bucket list. Here are 4 to 6 2-ounce pours of wines that you would only dream of buying, but you would never be able to afford buying a whole bottle of, and even buying a glass of it might be cost prohibitive. But for a couple of $100, he'll give you 6 of bucket list couple of ounce pours, and you can say, I have tried that. I have tried that. And I was like, it's a genius program, right? And it's the whole, he is creating, not only creating more new super consumers who are like, I have no idea what kind of wine I want to drink. Let me just try this and do that. But he is causing existing supers to get even more excited about the category, because, they do that, then they're going to show up to Binny's or Costco and be like, I got to spend more money on the category, right? So.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And I love that Tony in the chat is saying, change wine to bourbon, and you got me, because I'm a whiskey drinker too, right? The narrative, the story behind it, right? All these different kind of things that come along with what you like with this stuff. So Eddie, you're painting this picture really, really well. What I would love to dive into after we ask a question here from Tony himself from the Q&A is right after this, I want to shift from using the B2C kind of examples into a more B2B lens. We have folks here that are, kind of leans heavily towards real estate, like Jesse's in real estate. Jenny May, who just showed up, used to serve on a board together in Miami. Jenny, it's great to have you here. Stacy, good to have you back as well. And Trina, great to have you as well. I want to start using the fuel example, the way that you find them and entice people. I want to use it in a B2B example. So I'm just kind of teasing that so people stay engaged here. But Tony asked this question, and I love the questions, right? Bring them on. Tony asks, how do you convince your organization to nurture super consumers versus trying to attract the masses? I imagine that you have to have some great experience in doing this.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And what I'll say is, probably you talked about the fuel framework. You have to find the supers internally. Back in the day, I did some work for one of the largest food companies in the world. And I did an internal survey of like, hey, how many of you actually buy and consume the stuff you make? And how many of you actually love it, right? And I won't name the company, but like they're very, very well known. And it turns out of the top 100 executives, only 3 of the executives actually, quote, ate their own dog food, right? And I had more than one person who was like, I would never feed my kids this. And it was just really striking, right? And you see this in tech, right? You have some of the most famous executives in tech who've made hundreds of millions in that space will say, "Oh, I restrict screen time for my kids. They don't get to do all of this stuff." They know what's in it, and they know the dark side of what they have there. And that, so when you talk about how do you find people in the organization, it's really about, exactly what Kaleem was saying, executive problem fit. Find the people who are themselves super consumers of the category. You may have to work really hard to do that. It won't be obvious. If you work for a company that is founder-led still, most founders have that dynamic in there, like they are themselves a super, and that's why they founded the company. And then when the problem is when you work for a lot of large companies that have been around for a while, they're run by professional managers and executives, right? People who didn't found the company, they may not have the passion for it. Like I remember, this is, I know we want to talk about B2B and I'll get there, but there's a women's intimate apparel project that I worked on that my wife found hilarious. I was like, this is very uncomfortable for me, but a lot of those companies are run by men. Yeah. Right. And it's like, small surprise that the vast majority of women are wearing the wrong bra, right? And it's like the same type of dynamic, like it might be a finance person, it might be an operations person, but you got to find your tribe within the organization, and you got to get a proof of concept, and that's the part of, find them, understand kind of the business issues that they're trying to solve for. So if you, one of the ones that, I can't remember if I wrote about this, but like, I was helping an OEM who was selling HVAC systems to retailers, right? The heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems. And they were migrating from what we were calling dumb components to smart components, wirelessly connected sensors and this and that. And they're like, how do we figure this out? And it turned out they had to find their own super consumers, like people who are, like if your category had a Comic-Con, who would show up to that? That's what you're really trying to solve for, right? And that in this component HVAC system, it turned out that the real estate executive was the super consumer, not the CEO, not the merchant, right? And they were like, well, what's up with that? I would have thought, a smart compressor for a refrigeration system that would be the CFO's dream. You save some money and this and that. It's like, no. Many companies, retailers, few of them grow organically. They're like Target, Costco. You walk into one, you've walked into all. They're all the same, right? But many retailers grow by M&A. Think of Albertsons, like they bought Safeway, bought Ralph's. There are all these different retailers that they bought. That's how they grew. Why is that important? Is that they all have different components because the stores were built by different people. And whose job is it to put out the fires? It's the real estate executive. It's like, hey, I'm the senior real estate guy, and well, crap, you just bought another retailer that have a different spec than I do. They have different problems, and when their HVAC system fails, I don't know what to do about it, right? And so they were the ones who turned out to be the super consumer, and they were like, you know what, hey, client A, here's what I need you to do. I have a problem with XYZ components. My CFO wants me to fix it. I need you to write me a business case that proves that if I replace the whole darn thing with new components, my total cost of ownership will be lower, my ROI will be higher, my downtime will be better, et cetera, et cetera. And then he's like, ignore the fact that, yes, I am asking you to write me a proposal that will cost me more money. That's not my problem. My problem is putting out these fires. The money is the CFO's problem, but I can show like this is the right way of doing it. And so this is the whole thing, right? Because the real estate executive's job was not about reducing cost. It was about reducing headache. And how do you reduce headache? Was replace the darn thing with all new stuff, right? And so you have that dynamic, and I had no idea going into the work that that was the super consumer. And that the people that we thought were the supers, the CFOs, were not them, actually. That they were like, what are you talking about? Like when the CFO runs supreme in a retailer, usually it means that retailer is doing great. They know what they're doing. They're not going to be your super because they're going to be like, I know what the answer is. Just build it the same way. What's your problem? Leave me alone, right? But the people with the fires that they want to put out, because they grew in an M&A, seemingly not a very smart way, that they have fires put out galore. They were the ones who want firefighters.
Got it. Okay. So I want to kind of like distill some of this, right? And I knew Jenny May was going to tap in here when she was talking real estate executives. She's a badass commercial real estate broker in Miami. But we're going into the framework. The fuel framework is finding the super consumer, understanding them, engaging them, and then leaning in, right? So you're talking about finding them. And I think what you're saying, and spoiler alert, in the back of my head, I'm sitting here thinking, who are my super consumers, right? So you gave me some really good nuggets in the sense that somebody that is founder driven is more likely to want to lean into something like this because they are super consumers of whatever they solved. Because normally founders will solve a problem for themselves, like as I have as well. And also what I'm hearing you right, and I'm trying to be from Tony's perspective, I think if you take care of take care of the finding them, you're going to be able to propose it more succinctly to your board, right? Like I think for Tony's purpose, he's going to have to do some of the back end of like finding them and getting a really, really good insight to go with it. Because I think what you're saying is you got to find the person with the problem that cares about it the most, and get an insight from them. And that's what's
Yes.
going to guide things.
And you have to
And
solve their problem, right?
you got to
And
solve the problem.
and because this is the really important part, is that it is really hard to get religion, right? It is a how do I think about this? You should, in changing somebody who's focused on the masses to focus on supers, you're going to have about the same luck as getting somebody who's a registered Democrat to become a registered Republican. It's kind of tribal at some level, right? Now, how do you get that to work is when you actually have somebody who's like, no, set aside your philosophical differences. We vote this way. This person's going to reduce our taxes or put, I don't know, put a monorail or whatever the narrative, the analogy might be, but like it has to be a very, very specific person, find them, understand a very specific problem that the category constellation can solve for, engage them and solve it for it. Oftentimes you got to do it, off the record or off balance sheet. Like you kind of have to work in the background to do that. And then you double down, that's lean in, you double down on it. Once you've done that, you will find more people who are like, wait, how did that work? And can I do that same thing? And it's a domino by domino process, right? Because it is really, really hard to convince everybody to change their minds at the same time. Find the super, they will help change your minds one at a time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. And in the finding them, right? Like you have this framework, which Lee Bishop in the chat illustrates perfectly because he is the perfect example of a super consumer. This idea that the breadcrumbs of finding them is kind of like this combination of life stages, inherent motivations, and then exposure, education, and experience, right? And I say that because Lee just put in the chat, I'm a Democrat, but I have money, so now I vote Republican, right? So like Lee is in a life stage trigger.
Yep.
He's inherently motivated by human connection and the stuff that we're doing. And then the exposure, education, and experience is kind of something that we're serving up to him via content and via experiences and things that he can do. How did you, let's go back to that example that you talked about, the retail guys, right? Because to me, it's so clear that a CFO is a super consumer of keeping the status quo the same, right? Not a super consumer of change.
Yes.
How did you find the actual, that it was a real estate person? What led to figuring out those triggers? Was it that combination of things?
It was all of those things. And just by talking to folks, right? I mean, it was like, you can reverse engineer the story. Like I always talk about like, Disney, after acquiring Marvel, has made tens of billions of dollars telling superhero origin stories, right? So you find a super and you reverse engineer, like, how did you become a super in the first place, right? And then usually that what Lee illustrates so perfectly, I was this, then this happened, and now I'm that. That's what you're trying to reverse. That like, wait. You vote Republican, but you used to vote Democrat. What happened in between there? Like, what was going on? Well, I got some money, and it's going to change my worldview about how I think about X, Y, and Z. And that's totally legit. Like, one of the key thing, the moment to know is that some people are super consumers for life. Some people have super consumer moments in their life. Difference, right? Mm-hmm. And that the people who are supers for life, you don't have to worry about them. They're always going to be there for you. Some people come in and out of super consumerness because of a life event trigger, right? And that's the one where, it's the usual suspects, right? Of things that people say are the most glorious days of their lives. Like, I got married, I had a kid, I accomplished this in my career with it. We moved, and then you flip it around to the top 5 most stressful things. We moved, got divorced, someone died, health event. You're looking for those extremes, and that's when people are, they experience like, I'm not normally this, but I have to be because I am just, circumstances in life, dictate that I have to get there with it, right? So that's the whole nuance of like, when you get the origin stories, and it's not hard. You're just asking questions like, how did you become you right now? Tell me about your story. And people love talking about themselves, right? So, and then you're just listening for what was that pivot? what was that second movement, the second act in the story, classic storytelling, Garden of Eden, something bad happens and then redemption. Like what was that narrative arc? And then if I can find that trigger event, can I either park myself where that trigger event happens over and over again, or can I reframe my category specifically pointed at that trigger event so that when people walk through there, they're just falling into my category over and over, and they're like, how did I end up with you? Wow, it's a little bit lucky, right? But it's engineered luck.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And for the record, some people are super consumers for life. Some people are super consumers because of life. We're making a quote card out of that one for you. But Lori's got and by the way, for those of you following along, we've moved into the you section, right? Like this is the understanding, the super consumer part, right? Like the things that you want to understand is these triggers. Lori's got a really good question. And you and Lockhead had a podcast a while back about this idea of like first mover versus category designer, but how do early adopters / innovators compare to super consumers? Are they a subset? Is it a correlation? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So early adopters are a subset of super consumers. In that, one of the key characteristics of super consumers is they're always looking for a new solution, right? But not every early adopter spends or is articulate or is engaged as a super consumer. So that's the nuance that I would say is important. Now, in all practical purposes, you're not really, I always say anybody who spends an inordinate amount of money, time, or the reputation talking about a category is probably a super consumer. So somebody who, is sleeping out waiting for that new Chick-fil-A to open, or camped out waiting for the new, back when people would do that for the iPhone, those are clearly supers. But then within them, you have people who are like, oh yeah, I'm in line and I plan to flip these 6 iPhones when I get in the like. So you have to be careful, right? Like every super consumer is probably an early adopter of some sort, but not every early adopter is a super consumer. Some of them are doing it just transactionally. Some of them are, like if I'm a super consumer because of life, they're valuable, but not as valuable as a super consumer for life, right? So you just have to be a little bit distinguishing and, eagle-eyed about who these nuances are. And, you can learn from everybody, but know that the people who, have been super for the entirety of their lives are just going to know more than somebody who's a recent super consumer.
Yeah. So bringing it back to kind of like the folks in the audience, right? This idea. So Jenny, as a real estate broker, her super consumer is somebody that isn't just out there sourcing real estate deals, but is like also into urban design, also into like placemaking in the fabric of cities. That is a super consumer of commercial real estate and how things work. Maybe for Gareth, who's a drone. He's like they're like a drone integration company, right? Like they're technology integrators. His super consumer is, I've been trying to tell him about this, right? But he's his own super consumer. He's like a nerd inside of a like, blue collar industry, right? Like that to me is like, the person that's trying to inject technology into everything that they're doing, but they're working in these like legacy kind of jobs. Yeah. To me, that's his kind of super consumer that's reading that stuff. Let's move into E, the engage, right? And this strikes at the heart of kind of what we do as a company. So obviously my partner Isar has a question: what can a company do, practical actions to create and nurture super consumers? I know that you got a really great framework about this. I don't know if that's the way you want to go with this, or I don't know what is routine that works for this.
Well, so the key thing that I always talk about is this concept of super geographies or super geos, right? Which it might be a local zip code or market. It might be a Twitter community, so it could be a digital community. So either a geographic community, a digital community, a professional community. These are all things that are basically it's this idea of a bunch of super consumers are densely packed together in a physical space, a digital space, or a professional space, or however you want to think about it, right? And you always want it to be inviting so that non-supers can chime in or observe, right? And so the single greatest way, and this is where I think, your community building is so amazing, Pablo, is that you want, someone described it to me once as like, what you want are two supers nerding out, just going hog wild about like, isn't this so cool, this and that, and somebody who's not a super but is somewhat interested, watching the tennis match between the two of them, and they're like, what in the world are you guys talking about, and help me understand what that is, right? I mean, if you are on a plane or a bus and two people were going bonkers about this new coffee that they tried, and they're just like, it's the most amazing thing. If you are at all remotely a coffee drinker, you're probably going to butt in and say, excuse, I can't help but overhear what you're saying. What are you guys talking about? Yeah. That's how you create a new super consumer, right? And it is by creating demand density. Either it's like, well, shoot, everybody I know uses Jess, in this geography. Well, why wouldn't I be stupid if I didn't use that? Or it could be a digital community where you have digital density, right? It's, that's why social media is great with it. These webinars are great because you can see, people kind of reacting real time. Professional ones are also great too, right? And so conferences, things of that nature. And that's the beauty of, I mean, I go back to the Comic-Con idea, is like, how do you create that Comic-Con effect physically, in a geography, digitally, in a community, or professionally, or some other variant of it, where, it's just going to live on its own, because there's nothing greater than two super nerds nerding out with one another. But if you can do it in a way that other people can eavesdrop, you're going to create supers.
This is gold content for me, Eddie. So thank you very much. Right. But like, this is exactly right at the heart of what we talk about as well. Right. The idea that, I could easily have reached out to you. We could have podcasted. I could have interviewed you one-on-one, but the idea that we're able to have this conversation, you and I, while folks in the chat can interact with each other, can interact with us, we're driving kind of like 4 layers of relationship, right? I'm deliberately trying to create a relationship with you. I'm deliberately creating a relationship with Lee and Gareth and Lori and Jenny. I'm trying to forge relationships between you and them as well. And I'm trying to forge relationships with each other so that folks are, getting that shine, right? Like allowing for those conversations to take place in the Not Your Average Investor Show community that I talk about so much. It started like this on a show, right? It became a digital concentration. Then it moved to offline meetups where exactly what you're saying is happening, right? Like 7 people got together in Los Altos, California. One wasn't a client. That person became a client 3 months later, right? And now it's starting to move on into, like, recently this weekend, an amazing thing happened, which was that folks from the show decided to play the Robert Kiyosaki cash flow game online. So now they're having these other activities, right? So these like geodes, and where they get together and get to have just super consumers talking to other super consumers with other people listening. That person in the bus may be extroverted enough to ask the conversation, but they're at least on their phone Googling, what is this coffee, right?
Yes,
so it's like,
yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that's you just laid out the customer journey, right? It's create demand density, physically, digitally, professionally, however you want to do it. Nerd out about what is, like, what you do so nicely, Pablo. Stoke the fire. Nerd out on the coolest thing, controversy, whatever. And then two supers will have a hot take. This is the greatest thing. This is the worst thing, since blah, blah, blah. You do it publicly, and then you want to make sure all your search engine optimization is like, why is this the greatest thing since whatever, right? So that you can pick up somebody who is like, what are they talking about? Let me see if this is legit. And then, if you've done your SEO correctly, you'll pop up there. If you have done your marketing correctly, as we've talked about with Category Pirates, is like, okay, now don't tell them the solution, market the problem, right? You got to go hog wild into why this is the greatest thing since, and why this is the worst thing since, right? And then, eventually somebody will come out and say, well, what do I do about it? And usually they've got some sense as to why XYZ solution is the greatest thing or worst thing since whatever. But like, those discussions are if you can catalog that and you can set up your business or your category to follow that journey and intercept people along the way, you're going to be in great shape.
Love it, man. Super, super valuable interaction. Thank you. Eddie, we've got two really great questions in the chat. But I want to, before we get to that, one of the, I guess, like blessings of doing this stuff, right? It's like, I read your stuff 2 years ago. I thought it was genius. I read Category Pirates all the time, right? Like, but having you on the show made me go back and revisit the book, right? And something came up to me that I hadn't noticed the first time. And it's this idea that you end with culture and you end with hiring super consumers as a driver for this. And it really intersects nicely with kind of what I've been telling Isar for the last month of just like what we really need to market to is folks that take culture really, really seriously. They're the ones that are going to want to do this stuff. Why can you talk to me about the correlation between culture, super consumers, and business growth?
Yeah, it goes back to a construct that we talk about a lot in Category Pirates, which is the whole missionary versus mercenary thing, right? Is that our point of view is that companies and categories that are led by missionaries just will do better in the long run. They'll grow faster, they'll be more profitable, drive more market cap, and largely because they know that category design and category creation, it's a never-ending journey and not a destination, right? They're like, we're never done creating. Whereas if you are a mercenary, and again, it's not binary, it's a spectrum, right? But in general, mercenaries are like, that was pretty cool, I'm gonna rest on my laurels. Or we've made a lot of money, I'm just gonna squeeze that golden goose for a little bit more with it. And you just, the sustained pace of product and service innovation, business model innovation, data innovation is just it's exponentially greater when a missionary is at the helm or running a company, or is a company that's stocked by missionaries versus mercenaries, right? And it's not that, it doesn't have to be a moral judgment. It is just about sustainability, right? Mercenaries will call it quits, like, hey, I'm good, right? It's like a an NCAA team that's like, I got a lead and I just want to sit on it. I'm trying not to lose, right? And you get to a very different outcome. We're like, no. It's not running up the score on your opponent. It's like, how great can this team be? And I'm never going to stop shooting the ball with it, right? Or driving to the hoop. And so this whole notion of like, it just takes one mercenary to spoil the bunch, like a bad apple. You just need one person looking out for themselves, and not the super consumer at their behest. And that's why it is so important. Like, mercenaries, not bad people. Some of them can be quite pleasant, but a little bit of like, we can cut this corner, or you know what, we should raise price just because we can without adding any more benefits or value, or you know what, no one's going to notice in this quality control here, right? The whole kind of mindset is dangerous in my mind, right? And that's why you have to be very, very careful. Like one of, Royal Canin is a prescription pet food company owned by Mars. And, what's funny to me is that, regardless of the job that you're trying to get hired for, marketing, sales, or HR operations, they'll bring a dog into the interview. And they're trying to see, like, are you kind of weirded out by that? Or are you kind of like, oh, nice, Fido, or are you on your hands and knees engaging and really, like, it's obvious you love dogs, right? You love cats. And why is that important? It's because, there's a lot of smart people, and there's a lot of capable people out there, but energy is the greatest renewable resource, and passion, you can't replicate that. And you'd rather have somebody who's 85% is smart, 85% is capable, but has unlimited energy and passion for the category than the inverse of it, right? Because they'll cut corners and they're not going to do it the way that you get to. So like this whole, it is one of those things where you can get away by not paying attention to the missionary mercenary thing for a little bit, but it does catch up to you, and it's almost impossible to reverse at some point. So that's why you got to be vigilant about it.
Yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. And to me, that's like be vigilant about it, but as an offensive play, it makes so much sense, right? Like this, we're not a big company. We don't, like we're not doing a lot, but we're starting to attract a lot of talent just based on the fact that we really care about what we're doing and what we're evangelizing. And, I find that, I don't know if you follow Chris Walker and State of Demand Gen and the stuff that he's doing, right? But like, I find that the more that you are really painting the picture of how you see the world and putting it out there and getting people on your team that really believe in this, and then building out a team of missionaries, right? Not just the founder, but missionaries down the pike. It's like everybody that interacts with your clientele, everybody that your clientele or your prospects interact with, it rubs off on them, right? Like it just allows for you to scale the founder vision or the passion, because you're attracting people that do it. And what better growth lever than a bunch of super talented people that really care? Like, it's just so obvious to me these days.
Yes, 100%. And you can't measure that on a balance sheet, but you can tell. That's where companies are like, you can win talent, even if you're not paying at the top of the level. You'll and frankly, like what part of what I'm not surprised by of this whole work from home phenomenon is the vast majority of employees are not engaged at their work, right? The people who are, either eager to get back in face to face or, are more productive remote work, they're all super consumers. They're all missionaries. Like, it does not matter where I do my work, because it is the quest of my life to try to solve for. In companies that, what I just find it so fascinating that, Goldman Sachs, the CEO wants everybody back in. Very, very few investment bankers love their work. They're there for the paycheck.
True.
Right? And so, is it any surprise you can't get them to come in? Because if you're going to work an 18-hour day, you'd rather do it in your PJs, right? No, that category is screwed. They have to figure out how to get people to fall in love with the category. Otherwise, no amount of money and no amount of perks are going to get people back into the office.
Yeah, totally, man. I love how much we've hit on all these different subjects that you guys have dove deep on in Category Pirates. It's really like, I'm totally nerding out about. I'm a super consumer of Category Pirates and category design. So this is awesome, man. Eddie, do you have and I have no higher recommendation than the $200 a year that I spent on Category Pirates, for the record. I think when I first wrote the review, you like broke down my review as like a ham and eggs comparison or something like that. Like, I was like, I hate reading emails and I don't really do this online, but I love Category Pirates. Like, I really, really highly recommend it. Eddie, you got time to answer a couple of questions here?
Yes,
All right, cool, man. So Jess Merrill, so her business is, she is disrupting fundraising for nonprofits, right? She's creating this, like, she has a grant writing business, but she's creating this kind of like super fund to fund like the 8 strategic initiatives of the man, I forgot the ONU. I'm thinking about it in Spanish. United Nations sustainable initiatives. And she's asking, are there overarching similarities between super consumers, regardless of what they are super consumers of?
Yes, great question. And the quest is what is the overlapping part of it, right? And so people, and what's interesting to me is in the not-for-profit world for fundraising, not everybody gives. Of the people who give, they have different quests, right? Some people, I think Malcolm Gladwell, he did a great thing about, kind of really rich people giving to colleges, but in particular colleges that don't need their money because their endowments are ginormous, right? And so it's like, look, the reason why they give is for legacy, their own legacy, right? They have, I'm sure Jess, they've come across some sort of life event that's like, hey, I'm mortal, I will die at some point, or I need to rehab my reputation or something, right? And so there are people who will give to a not-for-profit for legacy and their own reputation. And those people, you can predict if you are offering an opportunity to give that allows them to be celebrated in the public eye and long after they're dead, they're probably going to give to you, regardless of what kind of not-for-profit you are. Now, there are other people who give for very different reasons. They're on a different quest. And, like for me, I wrote an article in Bloomberg about why I pay my my junior high school son in Bitcoin. I don't know if you saw this one, but like,
I read that.
yeah, it was basically this whole point of like, I'm trying to teach my kids who, so, I'm a child of immigrants, grew up very blue collar and, watched my parents scrap. And my great fear in my life is raising entitled children. It haunts me, and I probably am overcorrecting on it, right? But like, we give in part because, it's the right thing to do is our belief, but also we've told our kids, hey, we will help you get set up early in life. We're not going to leave you money. If you want to invest, I will help coach you in what to invest in, and we'll provide you the seed capital. You give it back to me when we're done with it, right? And if you invest correctly, you should not need an inheritance, right? Start early. The category pirates think about teenagers, and so I'm a full belief in all of that, right? Yeah. And so, to a large degree, our giving is motivated by how do we protect our children from the sense of entitlement, and it's manifest now. And a lot of giving. Here's what I find is that a lot of the people who do work on the not-for-profit side, they kind of focus the estate planning gifts with people who are a little closer to death's door than we are, right? But I'm like, no, we can do this right now. Like, let's do this. Like, giving away in our estate plan now is great, actually, because it helps me figure out how I should figure out what to do with, planning for our children here or there. So like, it's just a way of saying like, yeah, super consumers can relate to one another, even if they're in disparate categories. Because like, what you would see for me is like, why is this guy messing around with Bitcoin, and why is this guy reading books about, like the Richard Kiyosaki book and whatnot, or, but it's this whole mindset of like, my quest is how do I prevent entitlement from creeping into my kids? My category constellation will all make sense in that light. And if you can figure out what that is, then if you sent me a cold email about this category would help you prevent that from your kids, I'd be like, oh, tell me more about it, right? And so that's why the quest part, people on quests recognize and value other people's quests, but you'll often find that at the root of the quest are the same type of core motivations, even if the category expression and the category constellation is wildly different.
Amazing, man. Amazing. So much to deconstruct there, but essentially, yes, Jess, all super consumers are on a quest that combines them all. And if you figure out that quest, then you can connect those dots. And I think, Eddie, you just gave a great example of how you can use this as a outreach technique, as a relationship building technique, right? Like if I want to be better friends with you, I am sending you information on like how to stop kids from being entitled all day long, right? Like I now have that on my radar to build a relationship and see how that goes, man. So I think that was really valuable. Last question here, Jesse Rittenhouse. Background, Jesse is a green building consulting company. They're the category kings of that in Miami, actually, Spinnaker Group. And he asks, our company started by focusing on the super consumers, those needing to build sustainable buildings. Recently, the category has grown and a lot of competitors have joined it. How do we stay the leaders? Do we need to look for the super consumers within the sustainable building community and find a way to answer their needs in a way that none of our competitors are doing it?
Yeah, no, I mean, Jesse, the last part is exactly right, is what are the needs and delivered in a way that competitors aren't doing. But like, I would say, same kind of thing as the last question around the quest, right? Some people are supers in your category because they're just looking to greenwash, right? They're looking for the bare minimum so that I can get XYZ off my back, right? And you see it with BlackRock, who is being very much, agitators within their investment companies of like, hey, if you don't clean up on the ESG front, we're going to bail out of your shares and your stock will go down as a result. And so there are people who are motivated by your category, but largely from the absence of a negative. That's what they want. They're trying to avoid a problem. And then you have people on the other side of the quest, which are like, no, yeah, it'd be great if I got credit and I didn't get my hand slapped by XYZ regulator or investor. But no, I'm actually, I believe in this. It is my mission in life. It is the greener I get, the better I feel, the better the employees I can attract, and frankly, the better the type of customer that I want is going to resonate with what I'm doing here. So I like some super consumers, they believe the test is a pass-fail, and some believe there's extra credit. And you don't want to go for extra credit on a pass-fail exam. Like, that's not going to make any sense, right? So if you have a super that is like, I'm just trying to greenwash and just get rid of the, pass, then there's only so much you can do. And those are frankly the people that you want to cede to competitors. Like, if you lost that customer or client, you'd probably be okay with it, because you know what? Let somebody else overinvest in them, right? What you want are the real supers who are like, oh, you know what? There's no end to the amount of money. Like, my grade does not stop at A. It goes to A++, and or I don't get letter grades, I get numeric grades, and I want that all the extra credit is all mine. And in part, some of them believe it aspirationally, some of them believe it emotionally. Usually, these are people who have figured out that the greener they get, more sustainable they get, that there is a linear relationship between that and the talent or customers or investors that they attract. Like, it starts out missional, but it becomes rational. Like, oh, if I double down here, I will see it pay back in some other part of my business, and that's why I do what I do with it. And so that's the nuance you got to separate out. And competitors are great. They keep you on your toes, but no better thing than to stick them with a dubious consumer who's going to lead them around the wrong path. So.
Throw them an anchor. I love that, man. I think a lot about Jesse's business. A, because I used to be a green building consultant myself. B, he's my good friend that we've been figuring out how to work together. And as you're saying all this, right, like, I do think that the super consumer of green building certification is probably also a placemaking super consumer, and he's probably really thinking about her impact on Miami, or her impact on the urban, the urban core, and things of that sort. And like, Jesse, I really would recommend you to reach out to Kevin Bree, who's been a part of a couple of these calls. They're at Red Tea Homes in Colorado. They're developers that went full on. We're only doing green, and they were really worried about losing investors by becoming missionaries, but it's actually really turned their business way up and led to things. So maybe uncovering cross-contextual stories of how this has profited you to the bottom line from becoming a missionary might be interested. Eddie, this has been awesome, man. Did you have anything either?
Yeah, well, one quick note on Jesse's thing is that there's a company called Lomi. They have we call it the magic dirt machine. It's a home composter. It's amazing. It is an awesome product. And Jesse, the last thing I would say is, don't forget super consumer of 1, super of 9. So some of your clients, when they double down on green, you want to take that mission and help them find some serendipitous opportunities to monetize it. Those buildings that are going to double down on green, they probably have employees or clients or other folks who are also supers of other things green, like this Lomi product. There's no shortage of companies that are trying to sell into the green economy. So you may be sitting on a goldmine CRM list of companies that other green brands want to market to and sell to. And for all I know, your business model is actually a B2B2C model, right? Where you win the right B2B supers, and they give you access to B2C consumers that are expensive to acquire in the wild, but that you may be able to figure out how to get to in a much cheaper, faster way. And and by the way, you do that, they're all going to be thrilled, right? And you will be able to identify the real supers versus the mercenary supers, right? And you'll be sitting on a great opportunity, and I wish you the best of luck with that, because I think it's a real opportunity you have there.
Man, that's so incredible that you bring that up, right? Because so me, Jenny, and Jesse were all on this like Dream and Green charity board. It was started by this guy named Nick Ganea, and he just launched this direct to consumer, make your own cleaning products at home company, right? Like, and so I'm just like, I remember I hit up Jesse a while back with like a half-brained idea. I was just like, bro, you and Nick should like collaborate on how to do this thing. But the idea that the data flywheel of what Spinner Group is creating on these buildings and these consumers to then help other brands bring on, and the idea that anybody that's really interested in Nick's product would also be interested in green building certifications or being in a building, it seems kind of like the intersection of everything.
My personal dream is, when you figure out these category constellations, customer acquisition costs for everybody in there should go to 0, because somebody acquires it and you can share that customer with different category constellation categories in the constellation, and it'll be the world's greatest super consumer potluck. Is like, oh, do I have a super for you, right? And nobody has to spend money on marketing to get them.
So smart, so smart. And of course, my advice is launch an internet talk show. That is the foundation of all of this stuff.
Absolutely.
We are, thanks, Ed. We're literally filling up we're starting to teach it, right? So we have this boot camp that we're doing round 2 of, end of April. We already got 7 people registered. We'll love anybody that's here in the chat. If you want to launch something like this, I think it's a really, really good tool to identify your super consumers and create a community and do this stuff. So go to bethestage.live/bootcamp. Would love to have you in there. Eddie, man, this was phenomenal, right? Like, I really, really appreciate you taking your time to do this. There's just not a lot of people out there that I admire from the intellectual standpoint, the way that I admire the stuff that you put out. It's gonna, like, your subscription to the Wall Street Journal and the way that you look at it and then talk about it on LinkedIn has completely changed the way that I search for information to then share. And it's just like really amazing to get to connect with you. And I really appreciate you doing this, man. So anything that I can ever be of service to you in any way, man, please just reach out and ask. Thank you.
No, thank you, Pablo. I'm thrilled to have you as a thought partner and part of the Category Pirate Ship and the like. And there's no shortage of stuff that I can learn. So I am thrilled to be part of this community and contribute in any way that I can, because it's fun. That's what can I say? It's just fun. So
it is super fun. And last thing here is subscribe to Category Pirates, or you're literally just missing. Like, what was the Wall Street Journal advertisement that was like, back in the day? It was something like, your opportunity cost to not joining the Wall Street Journal was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that. If you're not reading Category Pirates, you're literally just like giving away the best strategies to everybody else, man. So thanks, Eddie. I'm gonna thank everybody here one by one as they're still here. So if you wanna hop off, man, I really appreciate it, dude. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.